The last green of the Wasatch clung to the morning like a memory refusing to die. Willow leaves trembled over a creek that had already thinned under July's hand. Beyond it, beyond that last shiver of cool silver water, lay the first low steps of the desert. Ocher hills, rising in heat shimmer, a horizon like hammered copper, and sky so wide it could break a man if he stared too long. Elias Carter sat his saddle and listened. Not for danger, though he had lived too long not to hear for it, but for quiet. A mule snorted behind him, shaking tired ears at flies. His second mule shifted its burden, and all tucked into worn buckskin, sinew rolls tied tight in a parfleche, a copper kettle blackened by years of smoke, coils of rawhide, a few steel traps gone near useless in this new age, and his old Hawken laid across the packsaddle like a guardian coyote keeping watch. 6 years in crow country had made him broad in the shoulder, brown in the skin, and silent in the soul. There was a scar on his jaw that marked the world before and after the Arikara fight on the Grand River, 1823, when death spat arrows like angry hail and boys learned to become men or corpses. Elias had lived, but some part of him stayed back there among the cottonwoods and blood. He clicked his tongue and nudged his pony forward. The little valley behind him, grass fading, creek gasping, wind holding its breath, was the last soft place between mountains and furnace. What waited ahead was the land Jedediah Smith had nearly died crossing. Cruel, dry, God-hungry country where white bones turned to powder and men's names blew away like sage dust. Elias had known men who followed Smith's tracks. Some never came back. Others stumbled out half ghosts, whispering about heat that talked and mirages that lied with women's voices. A trader at the last camp had spat tobacco into the fire and shaken his head when Elias said he was going south. "West ain't done killin' fools," he warned. "Smith got luckier than most. Fur's gone. Beaver ain't worth a musket cap now. What's left is sand, poison water, and graves with no markers." Elias only nodded. He wasn't chasing fur or coin. The mountains had given him years, a belly full of stories, and scars enough to last. The rendezvous camps, the laughter, the shouting, the wild whiskey fights and trading and tall tales had grown hollow. When word spread, Beaver was losing its magic, men changed. Some drifted east with eyes like winter wolves, some turned soldier, some married into lodges and took names that better fit the wind. Elias wanted none of it. He wanted quiet, real quiet, the kind that presses on a man until he's sure there's no other voice in the world but his own thought. The sun climbed. Heat rode with him now, slow at first, patient. The land fell open in front of him, sage rolling low and gray, rabbit brush in yellow spurts, rock ribs jutting like the spine of some buried beast. Larks fled the midday. Only the wind held court, and even that whispered rather than blew. By noon the grass was gone. The mules breathed hard, and salt crusted at the corners of their mouths. Elias walked them to spare the pony, boots sinking into sand the color of sunburnt bone, sweat cut trails through dust on his face. He squinted against glare and lifted a hand to shade his brow habit born of too many horizons, too many suns. Southwest lay the old Spanish trail, or some cousin of it. He'd seen scraps of wagon wheel, mule shoes lost, footprints dried into cracked earth like clay tablets. Men passed through here now, hunters, traders, dream-sick emigrants with heads full of river valleys further west. Most never tarried. This place did not court staying. But quiet lived here, thick and honest as rawhide. Late afternoon brought heat that pressed like a blacksmith's hand. The air shivered. Distant mesas floated like rafts on invisible water. Elias paused on a gravel rise and listened again. Nothing. Not a jay, not a bee, not a whisper from grass. The world held itself still, waiting to see if he'd turn back. He didn't. Toward dusk, fortune bent its finger. The faintest trickle of moisture darkened the earth at the base of a rocky fold. A half-hidden seam in the hillside offered a spring-fed seep, slow but alive water pushing up from the stubborn bones of the land. Beside it grew sage thick and rich-scented, rabbit brush silvering in the waning light, a stand of mesquite, leaning like old men against wind they remembered. Elias knelt and cupped the water. Cool. Not sweet, but clean enough after settling. He let it drip through his fingers and into the thirsty dirt. One mule nosed his shoulder, the other stamped impatiently. "Easy," he murmured, voice rasped thin by dust and miles. "We found her." He unslung his pack, drew his crow-knife bone handle worn smooth, blade honed thin as a prayer, and trimmed brush to clear the seep. He dug a shallow basin with his hands, packed the sides with clay, and laid willow twigs like ribs so mud would not swallow the pool. When it filled again, slow but faithful, he nodded once. Approval enough from a man like him. As the light bled out, he scraped a little fire pit and built a small flame from sage and dead mesquite twigs. It smoked sharp and sweet. He boiled water in his copper kettle, added a pinch of salt, then a twist of dried buffalo meat from a parfleche last memory of the Northscape. He sat cross-legged, watching the horizon fade from copper to bruised purple. Coyotes sang somewhere beyond the basin, one voice then two, then silence again. The desert spoke only in brief confessions. He chewed slow, rested his hands on his knees, breathed. The world was huge, and he was small but not frightened. He had known fear in blizzards on the Bighorn, in Blackfeet country when every twig snap might mean death, in the sick stillness before dawn when cholera walked the earth like a pale hunter. This place held no malice. It simply was vast, unforgiving, indifferent, and honest. He rolled his blanket near the seep, using the saddle as pillow. Above him the sky turned black and endless, stars pricking through with ice-bright hunger. Somewhere far off, a meteor burned a silent white scar across the firmament, a reminder that everything moves, even in stillness. A man could vanish here and leave no mark but what wind erases. He closed his eyes. Mule bells chimed softly in the dark. The earth breathed cool. And Elias Carter, who had traded roaring camps and rifle crack and the smell of hot castor grease for this silent kingdom of dust and faint water, let sleep take him not as a refuge, but as an agreement with the land. Tomorrow he would build, not a lodge, not a cabin, something else, something the desert would tolerate, something quiet. The world would call him mad. But the desert, if it judged at all, judged only by endurance, and Elias meant to stay. By the second sunrise, Elias was working before the heat had the strength to raise its head. Pale light seeped through the sage, turning the world the color of old bone. The seep-fed basin was holding water, now mud settling, pool settling into itself like a newborn animal learning to breathe. It was not much, but it was life. And life in this country was a thing a man tended the way a priest guards a flame. He set aside meat-drying sticks and walked the basin's edge, studying the lay of wind. He held a single crow feather between his fingers, waited, moved 3 paces, waited again. The feather trembled in one place more than another. There, where wind crept along the ground after striking the ridge, a subtle breath funneled itself, not strong, but steady. "Good," he murmured. "A body can teach breath if he knows where it already lies." The old crow men had said that. Find the wind, do not force it. A man wrestles river, but he listens to air. He tethered the mules under mesquite shade and cut a ring of earth where he meant to live. Not above ground where sun ruled, but in it in partnership with soil and shadow. He dug low and wide, scraping out a shallow trench nearly knee-deep, shaping it to follow a curve of rock and brush so it looked half-natural from afar. Each pull of his shovel blade, worn thin as a spoon from years in streams, was careful, intentional. He wasn't carving a home, he was convincing the land to let him remain. Around midday, a trio of riders came through the basin, lean men in sun-faded coats, salt bleached at the seams, dust on their hats thick as moth wings. They slowed at the sight of him, one spitting a stream of brown into the sand. "You burying yourself, friend?" another asked, chuckling. "Or just making a grave to fit ahead of time?" Elias shoveled, slow and steady. "Just letting the earth cool me," he said. "Earth don't cool in a place like this. She only burns slower." The third man sniffed. "You trapper folk gone. Strange, since Beaver died. Can't tell if you're hunters or moles." Elias didn't answer. Men who needed noise wouldn't hear him anyway. They rode on, still laughing. One called back, "When you cook alive down there, we'll sell your mules honest." Their laughter faded into the bright stillness. Elias kept digging. Let fools ride where they pleased. Quiet belonged to those who earned it. By afternoon he'd framed the trench walls with brush lattice, willow ribs, mesquite braces, twined together with rawhide and sinew. He laid saplings across the top, overlapping them like ribs on a buffalo carcass. Over those he spread sage branches and rabbit brush, layering them until the weave breathed shade but not sun. Each handful released scent sharp, wild, the desert's own incense. He poured water over the brush at dusk, watching droplets soak in, then drip slow. When air moved through, it whispered cool. Not like mountains, not crisp, but a desert cool, subtle as mercy. Next, he built a throat for the wind. A low tunnel scooped into the earth on the basin's east edge, lined with stone, pointed toward the natural draft he'd found with his feather. Opposite it, another narrow outlet. He'd seen this logic in Crow Lodge's smoke rising, air pulled, same law here, flipped for heat instead of fire. The earth would cool the breath would cool the man. That night he sat by the seep, sharpening his bone-handled knife. Coyotes called, nearer than before. The desert acknowledged him in small ways, a quail dust-bathing beneath the mesquite, a ringtail's tiny prints near the water, moths clustering at dusk like drifting ash. In morning he tested his shelter. A man could lie flat inside, elbows brushing packed dirt, head near the rim. Not a cabin, not a lodge. A den built with thought, not pride. He crawled in, dark but not suffocating. The roof filtered sunrise into dappled ocher, and the air, yes, cooler by degrees, enough to breathe easy. Enough that sweat dried instead of strangling. He smiled, faint, then rolled onto his back and listened. The earth above him creaked under settling brush. Wind probed the vent, a curious fingertip testing his work. He felt at peace in a way he hadn't since crow campfires and winter lodges, when men spoke soft, and wood popped slow, and night stretched forever. By noon he heard hooves again. Same riders, maybe, voices at basin's edge. He's here still? Lord above, he really dug himself a hole. One of these lone beaver men's gone mad for lack of company. Elias waited. Breath slow. Heat outside pressed like a hammer, but inside? Shade held. Air moved. The earth gave back some of what sun stole. The men left without more words. Elias shut his eyes. There was work yet, clay ceiling, charcoal trenching, food pit shaping. But the bones of the place were set. This would be a home the desert could tolerate, maybe even respect. Above him, wind shifted. The brush roof rustled, whispering a dry lullaby. A fool's shelter, some would say. But a man who lived long in wild country knew the world never asked if your ways made sense to others. It only asked whether you'd die by them. And Elias Carter did not plan to die yet, not of heat, not of thirst, and certainly not of another man's laughter. Dawn crept thin and brittle across the basin, as if unsure it wanted to risk another day in such country. Elias woke to the soft rasp of wind combing sage and the low breathing of his mules. Cool earth clung to his skin, earned cool, humble cool. The kind men in towns never learned to value until fever or drought came calling. He rose slow, stretching the stiffness from his back, and crouched by the seep. A film of night insects floated in the basin. He skimmed them with a willow twig, patient as a heron. A tin cup dipped, filled. He sipped, swallowed. Metal and dust. Life always carries a taste in such lands. Too clean, and you ought to mistrust it. He chewed. Dried, prickly pear pads softened overnight, then mesquite cakes, stubborn and dry. The meal sat quiet in his stomach, steady fuel. Breakfast of the forgotten West, the kind men lived by when trade posts and buffalo herds belonged to memory instead of land. By the time sunlight found the basin rim, Elias was shaping his next tool against the day, shade. Just as a man who lived among the crow learned to honor wind, a man crossing dry country must know the language of shadow. He walked the ridge and gathered rabbit brush in thick armfuls, tying bundles with sinew and yucca twist, laid them across the roof lattice, and soaked them again. Every drop counted. But water used right gives back. He watched the brush darken, the scent of desert herb waking beneath moisture. Steam whispered upward, then cooled. Even in heat, there are manners to nature. Honor them, and she grants breath. By mid-morning he knelt beside his shallow cooling pit and worked charcoal into soil-crumbled black bone of old. Fire. He'd seen similar tricks in crow camps, where winter meat kept longer when earth breathed under coals. Here it would do the same, but against heat instead of rot. He packed the base with clay so damp earth held cool like a jar, then lined it with sage to scent away flies. A cicada droned. Sun climbed like a predator, with lazy confidence. Elias paused, wiped grit from his brow with a strip of deer hide, then listened. That was habit, the pause, the ear turned. In crow country, sound meant life or death. A twig, a hoof, a breath not your own. Out here, the danger was different. Silence hunted, a shape shimmered beyond the brush line. Dust kicked, slow and limping. A mule? No too low, gait too uneven. As it neared, Elias saw a man leading a burro, hat drooped, shirt hanging like wet cloth. The man's lips were split white, eyes hollow. Mexican, by looks. Trail-worn leather leggings, serape faded sun pale. The burro's ribs stood sharp like stakes. Elias stood, palm open, showing no threat. "Water here," he said low, motioning to shade. The man stared, swayed. "Agua. Gracias, Dios." His voice cracked like baked clay. Elias guided him beneath mesquite, cupped water for him, slow sips so stomach didn't revolt. The burro drank too fast. Elias tugged its jaw gently, forcing pauses. Animals don't always know not to drown themselves in life. The stranger watched the trench shelter, eyes narrowed with both fear and marvel. "Brujo?" he whispered. Not in salt wonder. A man living in the earth like a fox. The desert tribes had such wisdom. Spaniards had seen some few who slept in soil against heat. "Just a man," Elias grunted. He gave the traveler mesquite paste. The stranger bowed his head and ate like he was tasting saints. "Demasiado sol," too much sun, others dead. His accent was rich, words honest. "Thought you, sombre spirit." Elias shook his head. "Only shade is what a man builds." The stranger crossed himself, then lay back, letting cool earth leach fever from him. Elias spent no more words. Men in trouble need quiet more than talk. By afternoon the Mexican could stand again. He pressed Elias's forearm in thanks, eyes wet with gratitude and awe. "You live here?" "For now. People say desert kills the stubborn." He looked around, seeing the trench, the brush, the waterhole shaped with patience rather than force. "Maybe it is stubborn men who kill easy, not desert." Elias nodded once. The man left, walking east, slow but alive. Buzzards peeled off from the far ridge, disappointed. When the basin settled again, Elias returned to his shelter. He sat inside as the sun peaked and the air outside turned molten. Inside, the breath of earth cooled his chest, cooled the wet cloth hanging above him. The world shrank to soil smell, sage smoke memory, and that blessed trickle of draft on his collarbone. A day passed. Another. He snared jackrabbit that second night, cleaned, and with his crow knife roasted the haunch, dried the rest. He brewed salt sage tea and drank slow. He watched stars pulse like frostlight, black sky swimming forever, and thought of winter lodges in the north where men listened to drums beating like hearts in the dark. Here the drums were wind whispering through brush, but the language was kin. He remembered an old crow elder by firelight once saying, "A man who learns thirst becomes a quiet man, and the quiet man lives longest." Elias did not smile. Men like him had forgotten how. But something eased in him. He drank one measured swallow, saved the rest. This was not hardship, this was agreement. The desert would test him, and he would answer by understanding, not fighting. Out across the waste, a coyote yipped a sound, half laughter, half prayer. Elias listened, and felt no loneliness. Only the rightness of being small in a large world that owed him nothing, yet allowed him breath because he had earned it. Tomorrow he would. Finish sealing the earth walls. Then food pit. Then cold trench. Shade first. Breath second. Cool third. And after that silence. The kind a man doesn't find in towns or camps, but only in places where water whispers and sun judges and the earth tolerates you just enough to let you stay. He laid back in the dark, the brush above him breathing slow, and slept like a stone tucked into riverbank mud. Outside, the desert kept its counsel. And in the cool belly of the earth, Elias Carter learned thirst not as enemy, but as teacher. By the 4th week, the sun stopped pretending mercy. It came over the eastern ridge like a torch carried by an angry god, setting sage tips ablaze with gold no man could touch. Heat did not build. It arrived sudden, absolute, without negotiation. Coyotes slunk to shade before dawn was done. Even the ravens quit their gossiping and sat silent on rock spires, beaks open, wings splayed, looking like black scraps of night left out too long in daylight. Elias rose before light pushed its blade above the hills. He watered brush bundles again, letting droplets run and bead and hang like tiny jewels before falling. When they hit hot earth, they vanished with a hiss. He drank measured, wiped mouth, breathed slow. Then he ducked into his shelter. Inside was cave-like shadow, cool as such land ever gave cool by reverence. Not right. He felt earth against his back where the wall curved, packed hard by his hands. The brush roof filtered light into soft fragments, dapples shifting like river ripples from childhood streams he could barely remember. Even in the worst of day, the shelter breathed. It breathed. He listened to the faint pull of wind sliding through the low tunnel, drawing heat up and out. Felt the faint caress across his cheek. He had known colder shelters, snow caves in Crow winter camps, buffalo hide lodges banked in drifts, but none he'd dug alone, with nothing but instinct, sinew, patient earth. Outside, a locust began its slow scream. Soon a chorus joined, a shrill fever. The land felt like iron held over flame. Mesquite leaves curled under. Lizards buried themselves. The world smelled of dust, resin, and heat so dense it had texture thick as wool against the skin. By late morning, footsteps scuffed near the seep. Elias stayed inside, listening. A mule snorted. Leather creaked. Then voices. "There, see it? Told you he was still scratching around like a groundhog. Lord save us, he dug a child's fort and calls it a home." "You mark me," a third said. Tone sour, with certainty born from ignorance. "Come August, he'll be bones with sand for breath." The men were the same who mocked before. Elias could picture them, brittle hats, whiskey tongues, the kind who thought loudness outranked wisdom. They crouched near his entrance, shading eyes to peer into dark. One voice softened. "You in there, friend?" Elias did not move. A rattler wouldn't answer if fools asked after it either. Another snorted. "Leave him. Man wants to die in a hole, desert'll oblige." Boots scraped, hooves clapped off. Silence returned, thick and blessed. Elias opened one eye. Light danced in lattice shadow above him. Sweat had not yet formed on his brow. His breath came easy. Outside, life tried to escape itself. Inside, he waited. Patience was a kind of shelter, too. Toward late day, a strange hush fell the stillness before a storm or after a death. The sun did not soften. It deepened, as though each hour was a hammer blow, forging the world smaller. Heat shimmer blurred shapes into ghosts. Even the flies lost ambition. Then hoofbeats again, but slower, uneven. Not swaggering riders this time. A softer sound, a stagger. Elias rose. At the basin edge, a rancher he recognized from spring slumped beside a boy of maybe 12, thin as a fence slat, lips cracked, face the color of old cotton. Their horse foamed at the mouth, sides heaving. The boy's eyes were half-lidded, breath shallow. Heat stroke had its hand around his throat. The rancher's voice trembled. "Sir, my boy water, for God's sake." Elias motioned them close. He poured a palmful of seep water, pressing it to the boy's lips. Slow, always slow. He ripped a strip from his shirt seam, dipped it, laid it across the boy's head. Then he whisked brush aside and guided them under the low roof. The rancher blinked in disbelief. "It's cool," he whispered. "Enough," Elias said. Not comfort, but enough. Shade settled over them like a benediction. The boy stirred, tiny swallow working down his throat. The father's face broke with relief. "How?" the man swallowed. "How in the hell?" Elias shrugged. "Earth knows more than men." The rancher looked ashamed. "I talked of you a fool. That ain't new to me." They waited. The boy slept, breaths evening, skin losing that fever sheen. Outside, the sun burned itself toward the horizon, stubborn as pride. Eventually the father whispered thanks, voice thick. He left a pouch of coins by the entrance. Elias didn't touch it. When they departed at dusk, boy, able to sit a saddle again, the basin felt changed. Not by debt, but by recognition. Some men spoke only mockery, others learned. Elias did not expect either, yet found one. Night rose, stars cracked open the sky. Elias sat outside, back to warm earth, and watched the first fragile bats sweep the dusk. His mules swished tails slow and lazy. The seep gurgled faint, steady as breath in a sleeping animal. He thought of crow nights by winter fire, when men told of desert wanderers, those who sought quiet more than safety, and who listened to land until it answered. Back then he thought such stories just wind and smoke. Now he knew the truth. The earth speaks loud enough if a man first learns to hush the part of himself that thinks noise equals life. A cooling wind touched his cheek. Elias closed his eyes. Tomorrow would be hotter. The desert was not done testing men, but he had built himself a place inside its judgment, and so far it had not condemned him. Dawn came dull and colorless, as if even the sun begrudged rising. The air felt wrong, not hot yet, but pregnant with heat, swollen, waiting to burst like a fever. Elias knew that feeling. He had seen it on the Yellowstone plains before a hailstorm split the sky, in crow lodges before winter winds roared down from the high peaks. But here, the omen was different. No storm brewed. No rain stalked the horizon. This was the prelude to a killing heat. Elias rolled from his shelter, hips stiff from ground sleep and stillness. He checked the seep lower, slower, but not yet quit. He whispered, thanks to whatever deep vein fed it. Survival was part muscle, part patience, part reverence. He wetted brush roof and ground cloth before the sun broke. Every drop was an oath, every drop was a gamble. He rubbed damp earth across his forehead, neck, wrists. It dried instantly, leaving only the memory of coolness. By mid-morning, the world shimmered white gold. There was no breeze. Sand lay like coals asleep. Even the insects had given up their singing. Heat pooled on the basin floor like a thing alive, waiting to crawl into lungs and marrow. Then, the first sign of true danger. A lone mule skittered into view at the basin edge, rope dragging from its halter, tongue swollen purple. It stumbled, fell to its knees, and pitched sideways. The beast shuddered twice, then stilled. Buzzards did not circle. They didn't need to. They watched from rock and waited. Elias removed his hat, bowed his head. A mule was no stranger, no man's child, but still a creature of toil and trust. This land made no distinction in hunger. Heat was an egalitarian killer. He dragged the carcass away from the seep, covered the head with brush to keep flies from the water, then returned to shade. The desert was not cruel. Cruelty has intention. The desert was simply absolute. No bargaining, no bending. By noon the wind came, but not relief. It came like breath from a furnace door, heavy, scorching, without mercy. Sand drifted in sheets across the basin. Sage leaves curled tighter. His mules stood motionless, heads down, flanks twitching with silent endurance. They trusted him, or they trusted the earth. Same thing, maybe. Elias crawled back into his shelter. It felt like sinking into the lungs of the land. Cool? Not quite, but cooler. Shade drawn from patience, breath drawn from knowledge. The little draft hole whispered faintly, coaxing heat out like poison from a bite. He lay still, saving body heat and water alike. Sweat dried as fast as his skin made it a warning sign to city men, but to mountain men, a simple fact. He chewed mesquite flower mixed with tiny sips of water, enough to keep strength, not enough to waste. Outside, the world roared in silence. Hours passed. Sound had gone strange, muffled, as though cotton stuffed the ears of creation. Elias dozed in half-dreams, where crow drums beat lightly and snow lay thick, then snapped awake in a rasp of thirst. He drank one swallow, no more. Midday bled toward afternoon before he heard them, voices broken by distance, cracked like clay pots left in sun too long, not riders this time, walkers, staggering. He rose, crawled from the earth like a badger, eyes narrowed against glare. 4 figures lurched across the basin, men gray with dust, clothes stiff with sweat salt. One carried a girl slung on his back, limp as wet elk hide. Their canteen swung bone dry, their lips had split open, eyes wild, unfocused. The first man tried to speak but only croaked. Elias gestured to shade, voice low, steady. Come, slow, sit. No energy remained in them to question. They collapsed like sacks of grain dropped from height. Elias dipped cloth, pressed moisture to each brow, each cracked mouth, not to drink just enough to wake body memory, remind flesh of water's promise. One man whimpered. Another muttered nonsense. The girl's chest fluttered like a dying bird's wing. They had walked into death. The desert had not stalked them. They had carried their end with them like a shadow. Elias tended in silence. Slow water, shade cloth, clay cooled against skin. He hummed a crow evening song, not prayer, not music exactly, but a tune the world could rest its head against a while. One man's eyes cleared. "You again?" he rasped. Elias recognized him, one of the mockers from spring. Sand had humbled him now, heat had chewed the arrogance from his throat. "You dug a cave in the open." He tried to laugh but made only a dry click. "Thought you insane." Elias tilted the water skin just a drop against the man's tongue. "Sometimes sanity gets a man killed." The man's hand shook. "We were headed back to the fort. Waterhole we counted on was gone. Just gone. The desert don't promise twice." A faint wind passed. The brush roof quivered, casting trembling shade. The girl stirred. Elias cooled her neck again, whispering nothing, just sound, like wind through pines. Hours passed. At dusk their breathing lengthened, steadied. The heat lifted some retreating, not defeated, only resting. When they could stand again, the lead man bowed his head, not to Elias, but to the idea of humility itself. "Why, help us," he whispered. Elias shrugged. "I'm living. You came dying. Seemed right." The man swallowed. His throat worked like stone on stone. "You saved my daughter." Elias said nothing. Some debts do not need words. They left after dark, when air cooled enough to walk. The man turned once, looked at the trench shelter, the brush, the quiet water, and shook his head, not in doubt, but awe. "Lord preserve you," he said. Elias did not answer. Men speak prayers. The desert deals in agreements. When silence returned, Elias sat alone by the seep, listening to night frogs far off. He dipped his hand in the small pool. Still there, still feeding him. He cupped the water to his chest, like a man warming hands at fire. Tomorrow would be hotter. The land still had tests to give. But tonight, the earth had given back what he put into it, and that was enough. Morning did not dawn so much as seep, pale and strained, as if the sky itself labored under heat's yoke. The basin lay still, animal quiet, the kind of stillness that belongs to churchyards and scorched places. No bird called, no insect hummed. Even the seep murmured softer, as though the earth were husbanding its last gift. Elias rose slow, bones stiff from too many nights in a hollowed trench. He rolled his shoulders, checked the mule's eyes tired, hides dull, but alive. Alive counted for more than pride out here. He rubbed them down with handfuls of damp sage, murmuring low. Beasts in such land needed talk as much as water. His last mule, the one with frost scar on its right ear from a Yellowstone winter, favored a leg. Elias knelt, thumb pressing gently along tendon, not broken, strained, swollen. He cooled the leg with seep water, massaging with wet sand the way crow horse doctors had taught him. The mule's breath hissed, then eased. Still, Elias felt a weight deep as stone settle on him. A lame mount in desert country was not a sickness, it was a prophecy. He did not pray. Prayer in the West was not words, but labor. So he gathered mesquite pods, pounded them to meal, rationed jerky, checked his charcoal pit, patched a seam in the brush roof. The shelter now had the gravity of a temple born of necessity, worshipped in sweat. By midday the mule lay down, labored breathing, eyes clouded. Elias sat beside it, hand on its neck. He had seen men die quieter. When the last shudder came, he stayed sitting, not turning away. The desert did not scorn grief, but it demanded you keep still while you felt it. He dug a shallow grave among mesquite roots so scavengers wouldn't drag the body across camp. Not much earth to spare in such ground, but he owed the beast the courtesy of struggle. Sweat stung his eyes, his arms shook. He worked anyway. When the mule was covered, Elias pressed his palm to the mound. "You carried me," he whispered. "Now rest." A wind stirred just then, thin, papery, but real. The kind of wind that passes through mesquite leaves like a tired sigh. Elias rose and returned to shade. A man could leave a place after a loss like that. Many did. The desert does not bind, she strips. But Elias stayed. To move too soon after death is to insult it. And he was not a man who insulted anything that took life from him. As he sat inside his earthen den, letting the cool earth bleed heat from his bones, the ground trembled faintly, hooves again. But not many. Not a party. 2 riders, maybe 3. The sound was wrong, uneven rhythm, stumbling cadence. Not strong travelers, worn ones. They came into view in the afternoon glare, silhouettes wavering, as though the heat drew them in charcoal strokes across the horizon. As they neared, Elias saw their faces and knew them, the mockers. The same 3 men who had once laughed at his trench, calling him mole, grave dweller, lunatic. They looked less like men now and more like ghosts who had borrowed bodies that did not fit anymore. One slumped forward in the saddle, eyes half closed. Another held reins with fingers cracked raw. The third, the loudest of them, was not mounted. He walked behind the others, stumbling, rope tying him weakly to his horse like a child tethered to keep from wandering. Their canteens hung empty, leather shriveled. Their lips bled. Sun had carved hollows beneath their cheekbones. Elias stepped from shadow and stood in silence. The men halted, swaying. The loud one stared at him, vision swimming. "You," his voice rasped like sand dragged over bone. "We mocked you." Elias waited. Let the wind fill the space between them. "We ran dry," the man croaked. "One spring, gone. One, poisoned. Thought we'd make the fort." Thought. His knees buckled. He hit the dirt hard, breath gusting out. Elias moved with no hurry. Deeds done in panic rarely save lives. He lifted the man beneath the arms, half dragged him to shade. The others dismounted and collapsed. He gave each a cloth dipped in water on tongue first, no swallow, then lips, then forehead. The land did not forgive mistakes, but sometimes it permitted mercy. One of the riders looked at him through tear-cracked eyes. "Why?" "Because we're breathing," Elias said simply. "That's reason enough." They rested in silence. Shade felt like miracle. Earth's breath touched each face. Slowly, color crept back, not rosy, but the dull clay shade of the living. The loud one spoke again, weaker now, humbled without shame, which is the only true kind. "You were right." Elias shook his head. "Not right. Just listening." The man's voice cracked. "I said you'd die in a hole." "And I said nothing," Elias replied. "Silence travels further than talk." They dozed. Elias tended mule carcass scent, kept brush damp. When they could stand again, he rationed them meal and bitter tea. They ate without complaint. Suffering makes polite company. As dusk bled into mauve and violet, the men prepared to go. The loud one lingered. "We'll speak of you to others," he said. "Tell them a man can live here if he's patient. If he learns." "No need," Elias said. "Those who believe words don't need them. Those who don't won't hear." The man nodded. "Still, I'll try." They left slow, shadows stretching long behind them. For a moment, Elias watched them go. Not with pride, not with vindication, just recognition that life was stubborn, and humans more so. When they vanished into dusk haze, Elias turned back to the shelter. Coyotes gathered near the mule mound, waiting their turn. He waved them back gently. Tonight, he promised. He sat by the seep, dipped his hands in the water, wiped dust from his face. The basin breathed its quiet chorus, crickets cautious, wind soft, stars cutting ice-bright wounds into the sky. The heat had eased, but not surrendered. Tomorrow, or the day after, it might strike again. He leaned against earth, feeling its cool pulse against his spine. Out here, the line between living and gone was as thin as a sinew thread. Men mocked what they feared, then crawled back to it when pride cracked. He closed his eyes. The desert had claimed his mule, his sweat, and hard pounds of his flesh. It had tried his patience and tested his judgment. Yet it had not taken him, not yet. And in that narrow space between cruelty and allowance, Elias Carter found the smallest ember of peace, not triumph, not safety, just continuance. And for a man who had walked too long among ghosts and gun smoke, that was more than enough. When the heat finally broke, it did not break with cloud or rain. No thunder, no storm marching in from the horizon. Instead, one dusk the sun simply eased, as though some unseen hand lowered it with gentler intent. The wind returned thin at first, then with the cautious confidence of a deer sipping from a new spring. Elias felt it before he heard it. A coolness under the brush roof, a whisper that slid along the packed clay and brushed his cheek like memory. He let it pass over him without greeting. Wind does not like to be thanked, only acknowledged. He stepped out into purple twilight. Mesquite shadows stretched long, and stars budded slowly in the deepening dome above. The seep still trickled less now, but still enough to call itself alive. Coyotes drank there in the night now and again. Elias no longer shooed them. They kept snakes honest and company quiet. The ravens, too, had grown bold, stalking in black procession at dawn to inspect whatever scraps the desert spared. Days passed gentler. Not soft, this land did not know soft but livable, breathable. Life crept back in small gestures. A quail fussing in brush, lizards sunning, a distant dust column marking travelers at dawn. It was not mercy. It was rhythm returning. One morning, Elias found boot tracks near the seep, not new, not fresh, half filled by wind. 3 sets, perhaps 4. Someone had come looking and chosen not to disturb him. Or perhaps they simply didn't find him. In desert country, a man could walk 10 paces from another and remain a secret. He mended his moccasins, ground mesquite pods, checked traps he set not for need but for habit. He sharpened his knife. He hummed crow songs that spoke of moving camps and winter moons and buffalo that no longer roamed here. Then, one night, he dreamed. He stood in snow again, deep and blue-shadowed, lodge smoke curling. Children's laughter drifted from hides, stretched tight against wind. A crow woman ladled stew into a wooden bowl. A boy chased a dog around a hearth, hair long and black and wild. Elias stood among them like a man stepping through his own memory. The boy looked up and said, clear as spring water, "When the wind finishes teaching you, come home." Elias woke with breath caught in his throat and frost in his chest, though the air was warm. He sat long, staring at stars. By dawn he had decided. He packed what little he owned, rolling sinew and all, tying his kettle, folding hide blanket tight. He wrapped coals in ash inside a horn fire to carry, tradition older than any rifle. He set his traps on end. He cleaned the seep basin without hurry, smoothing earth, leaving it neat. The desert did not grant many gifts. A man repaid what he could. He took one last drink. Cool, true, earned. Before he left, he walked to a mesquite branch and tied a single crow prayer feather to it with sinew. It fluttered in the faint breeze, small, humble, like a whispered promise. Not a marker. Not a monument. Just a sign to the land that he had passed through respectful and whole. He slung the pack across his back, adjusted the Hawken rifle, and turned north. No fanfare, no backwards glance. Men seeking peace do not need to see what they leave, they carry it. Toward midday, dust rose on the far rim, the shape of wagons or riders approaching. He stepped aside into a fold of rock and sage, not hiding, simply not needing witness. A small party reached the basin emigrants by their look and gait. Hats drooped, clothes trail scoured. They found the seep first, then the brush lattice. They knelt in shade, marveling at cool earth. One found the feather tied above, touched it gently. "Who built this?" he whispered. Another answered, "Soft as dusk. Not a fool, I reckon." They camped in the basin that night. Coyotes watched from the ridge. Wind carried a quiet hymn through sage. By morning the travelers moved on, leaving only footprints. And far ahead, already swallowed by land and horizon, walked a lone figure, steady, unhurried, heading toward the lands of the Crow, or perhaps simply toward wherever wind ran cleanest. The desert did not mourn him. It does not mourn any man. But the land remembered his patience. And the wind, passing through the basin, spoke his name in dust and quiet every dusk thereafter. Not loud, not proud, just true.